April. What happened in April? Well, I streamed almost every day of this month. Did lots of speed running. Got, let's see, what were the stats? 36 world records, 4 second places, got 3 subscriptions and 27 followers. So that's a big stats, but let's talk about each thing that I ran. So Midnight Resistance. What a game. I ran this once years ago, and I can't remember anything about it when I ran it. I did not have a very good time. So when I picked it back up this month, it was really about, well, how far do I want to push it? Do I just want to bop my old time or what? And going through free aim any percent easy sort of hooked me. Like I sort of got into the rhythm of the run, and I was like, let's look up the next piece of tech. What does a quick kill look like on this boss? And at some point, I was like, well, I'm just looking at the world record run now, trying to figure out how they did their run. And on that one, I think I ended up pushing the world record 15, 20 seconds faster than it was before. From there, I moved up to free aim any percent normal. Normal was interesting. There actually are other runs on the normal boards. But that one, I want to say that one was a little bit easier, partly because a lot of the tech from easy translates to normal in a modified form. And I was just sort of in the groove of the game by then. After that, hard, any percent, that actually gets more difficult. And any percent very hard is quite the experience. But both of those, honestly, were more about play the game, try to play it well, try to play it sort of fast, but for the most part, just try to make sure you get through the run to the end. And ideally, get like a 1cc. Though in practice, supercharged fire is absolutely the best weapon in pretty much every category of the game. And when you die, you don't drop your supercharge, it just evaporates into the air, unlike every other item in the game. So dying, usually not great for the run, much less a continue. Moving out of any percent into low percent. Low percent for Midnight Resistance is just you can pick up keys, but you can never buy anything from the shops. And the shops are how you get anything that's actually useful by using those keys. Easy and normal were pretty straightforward. Hard was pretty difficult. As it turns out, if fighting the final boss with just the pea shooter on hard difficulty requires you to do some pretty tricky jumps multiple times while also trying to manage where you're aiming. And unfortunately, I could not find a way to beat the final boss on very hard with just the pea shooter. So both of the low percent very hard category boards are still empty. And at least as far as I can tell, they are impossible. So moving off of Midnight Resistance. Drawn Deadly Discs. Gosh, what a childhood favorite this was on the Intellivision. And I did do runs on both the Intellivision boards and the Atari 2600 boards. I gotta be honest, 2600 version of this game, it's okay. But I think it suffers a lot from the translation to the more limited hardware. There's no recognizers. The enemy types are much less varied. There's only one kind of disc. There's a couple of behavioral elements from the enemies that just aren't as compelling. But also, that is where most of the second places for this month came from. World record holder, they did a great job of pushing that time really far down. It's deep into RNG and execution territory, and at some point I was just like, yep, I'm done with this. I don't feel like I would enjoy pushing this any further. So that was Tron Deadly Discs. It was great to come back and push my old times lower on the Intellivision boards. Next up on old hardware, 2010, the graphic action game. This one was actually much more recent in my history. I think I last ran this right before I transitioned. But it another one that was neat to come back to and push it a little bit further. And in this case, it involved reading the manual more thoroughly and also doing a lot more experimentation with the game to honestly try to figure out what are all the moving parts for beating the game, especially at the higher skill levels. So where did this game end up? Well, for skill level 1, now it's less than a minute. Skill level 2 and 3 are much longer. Skill level 2 is not actually that much longer because the way the difficulty curve works in that game, it's steep because it has multiple axes on which it can make things more difficult, and on every skill level bump, it bumps all of those, and they compound quickly. So in skill level 1, you start with HAL already operable, so you can right off the bat get HAL to help you power up other systems. The volcanic eruptions are pretty infrequent in skill level 1, and you only have to fix 4 subsystems each of the engines and the reactors. So between HAL helping you and you not having a whole lot of systems to power up, pretty quick. Also, you start at a high enough altitude above IO that if you finish doing the fixing quickly, you can hit the partial boost button, and you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be able to hit the altitude requirement to complete the game without getting any component failures. Skill level 2, you start a little bit lower and you descend a little bit faster, but as it turns out, you can fix all of the necessary reactor and engine parts fast enough by yourself to do a partial boost that will usually succeed in getting you to escape IO. So pretty fast run there. A little bit more RNG though. Skill level 3 is actually quite the challenge. You're gonna have to refix systems, both because of sort of ambient failures just caused by eruptions on IO, but also you're going to need to partial boost, and your choices are to either do safe partial boosts, which only give you 100 kilometers per boost. They'll never fry any components, but you only get 100 kilometers per boost, and then you need to wait 10 seconds before you can do it again. But ideally, you jump back into another system to either fix it or power it up. That one is at least pretty straightforward. You can do those safe partial boosts until you've powered up enough stuff that you either have a guaranteed escape. That was one thing that was discovered. If you fix all of the subsystems, including HAL, when you hit the boost button, you immediately win. You don't have to wait and roll the dice to see if you have component failure before you hit the target altitude. But that isn't necessary for skill level 3. You can fix most of the subsystems and sort of ooch your way up until you're close enough to the target altitude to escape. Skill level 4 on paper is beatable. I've yet to do it. I have not seen any videos of anyone beating skill level 4. The closest I found was on Twin Galaxies, and it was somebody doing a score attack on skill level 4, which meant that they never actually beat the game. They actually hit a kill screen where it glitched out and hung, but they were hovering right underneath the altitude you need to complete the game and purposely not hitting it so they could rack up more points. So anyhow, 2010, the graphic action game for ColecoVision. It was a lot of fun going through it, but I'm feeling pretty done with it at this point. Next game. Jeopardy's CPU's percents. Sure, I guess people would call this a meme category. It definitely falls into the idle speedrun category of runs you can find on SRC. Um, I had done a bunch of them, and a couple of people, couple of speedrunning buddies I know had also done them. But what I noticed was one of the runners, she's Shardcore, had done multi-instance runs of CPU percent. So launching multiple instances of BizHawk or whatever emulator she was using, and then having them all bound to the same controls so you can start them all at the same time, and then you time them all, and that's a more efficient way to grind for this, idle category of run for Jeopardy. So I started going through all of the different variants that have that board subcategory, and that was basically all of the Genesis and all of the Super Nintendo variants. The NES ones don't have it, and the newer systems than the Super Nintendo or Genesis don't have them. But for all of the Genesis versions, using that technique got me some pretty good improvements really quickly. And for Deluxe and Sports Edition, Super Nintendo was also pretty quick. But for Original Edition Jeopardy for the Super Nintendo, wow. That first place time is really good. So is my old PB, honestly. So whereas all the other ones, just a couple of runs of 24 up BizHawk was enough to get a PB or world record. For regular SNES Jeopardy CPU percent, I think at this point I've probably done a simulated month worth of runs and still haven't gotten there. So that's going to be a longer project. If you're interested in seeing me do more of that, I have a channel point reward to do a full 24 hours of 24 up Jeopardy runs. I do want to return to non-CPU percent Jeopardy, but not right now. I need to do a little bit more prep work on that, some tooling, some reverse engineering, and just a lot of research. And once I get into that, I probably want to do a lot of the different ports of Jeopardy all in a run. So, yeah, maybe later this year, maybe next year. Who knows? Ninja Golf. So I had run all of the categories on this a few years ago. So coming back to it, I had a decent idea of what I was in for, except that while I was gone, the board had been taken over by somebody new who had introduced some new techniques that aren't always well received in the speedrunning community. In this case, they had discovered that there were item pickup seeds, and that in general, if you'd only ever speedrun the game by doing a hard reset and then playing, you would always see the same power on seed, which was missing some of the power ups that are in the power up pool, but just simply won't be generated on your first playthrough. So they sort of decided that, hey, let's allow seeded runs now, so you can do whatever you need to do, partial playthroughs of the game overs, just I think soft reset might do it, but whatever it is, and then from there start your run. And in their case, using a save state to start the run. And that allows you to manipulate the items you're going to get around that and get on that run. There's still variance of where exactly every power up gets spawned in a run. Depends upon the angle and power of your shots, what you pick up, where you die. So it doesn't like lock every single power up in a place, but it does start you from a position to where these are the order of the power ups, and this is about where they should land. And if you have really consistent play, you can plan around that. So the seed that the former world record holder used was a seed that put the skip power up near the beginning of the 8th hole. The 8th hole being the big water hole. Wait, was it the 7th? No, no. It was at the very beginning of the 5th hole. The 5th hole is sort of an unremarkable hole. There's a large water hazard, but it's not that large. And in every other regard, it's got a fairway, it's got some rough, it's got some woods. That's it. So starting from that, I did some work trying to figure out, so how exactly do the item seeds work? And as far as I can tell, it's literally, there is a sequence of power-ups that will be generated, and whichever ones you see in a run, and then game over, or complete the game or whatever, the next game you start picks up from there, regardless of what difficulty you were playing or play next. So based on that, I shifted things around so that the 1-up, you get a 1-up pretty early, you get a full health around, I think it was on the second half of hole 4, and you get the skip right at the beginning of the 9th hole. So that's actually a pretty good seed, and mixed with some good execution and some consistent drives on each hole, and yeah, turned into some much improved times across the categories. So still a neat game. I'm curious where it goes from here. Also curious where the thread goes that was discussing the nature of the seeded runs. While there are 8 to 10 runners of Ninja Golf, all but 3 just, they seem unlikely to return to the forum to talk about stuff like this. So curious to see what happens. Maybe there's a category split. Maybe it just stays the way it is. Answer clear. Next game, American Gladiators, in this case for the Super Nintendo. Gosh, this game is, the speedrun category, which is only one category, any percent, or beat the game. I can't remember what it is. You go through all the events, and at the end of all the events, you need to have more points than your computer-controlled competitor, which, as it turns out, isn't too hard to do, even if you fail out of a lot of the events as quickly as you can. But as a result, in terms of how the speedrun feels, there's a little bit of execution and there's a ton of RNG. And in terms of reset tactics, the biggest sources of RNG are at the end of the run. So the very first event has a small amount of RNG that is worth resetting over. But then for almost the entire rest of the run, you are waiting to get to the end to see what RNG you get. So that one, like, it wasn't unfun to run. It wasn't but it also wasn't like super fun to actually execute on. But doing the research to figure out where the RNG is, what the range of the timings were for those RNG segments, that was sort of cool. Speaking about games that I went deep on, that maybe they didn't need to be gone deep on, was Smurf Rescue at Gargamel's Castle for the ColecoVision. Gosh, this was a journey. So just for reference, this is like a 59-second speed run on skill level 1. If you just look at a run, it looks like almost nothing's happening. You move to the right, you jump over obstacles, you jump on top of a skull, and then onto a crate, and you rescue Smurfette, and that's it. In skill level 1, there are no moving enemies. There's RNG in the form of different screens with slightly different obstacle variants coming up, but there's just not a whole lot going on. What you miss in terms of what's in the game is there is some tech going on. Specifically, if you jump through transitions, you save some amount of time In general, it seemed like about a tenth of a second versus walking through the transition. Different terrain RNG will make it easier or harder to do that. The other RNG is how many obstacles total across the entire run are generated. There's a few different variants of every screen type, and which ones you get is RNG. There's also one last bit in the cave terrain type. You can get obstacles that are close enough to the edge of the screen that you can jump over the obstacle and jump through the transition in one jump, which sometimes saves time. Now, all of that is in the game. The other thing that's in the game that you don't really see that's less about speed tech and more just the fundamentals of playing the game, the controls are difficult. So if you've seen a ColecoVision controller, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, there's a 12-key keypad on it. There's 4 buttons on the sides of the controller, and then there's this stubby little joystick. So you might expect, you move around and you jump. Well, the joystick probably lets you move around and duck and such, and then you press a button to jump. But no, you press up to jump. It only uses the joystick for movement. And it's like, okay, well, up to jump isn't necessarily that bad. But the way they modeled jumping up versus forward versus a large jump is slightly cursed. To jump straight up, you have to have not been moving for a certain number of frames, and then you just press up. And that will make you jump up. In general, just jumping up, not very useful. To jump forward, like when you need to jump over most obstacles, you need to be moving in the direction you wish to jump and then press up. But you can't just press the direction you want to go plus up diagonally. If you do that, you'll just keep on walking. Also, if you stop moving for too many frames before you jump up, you'll just do a vertical jump instead. So all of this adds up to you get really good at making this sort of Hadouken movement on the D-pad if you're playing on a D-pad. I remember playing this game as a kid at a friend's house and it being just baffling trying to get the Smurf to do anything you wanted to do. And this is why. Then finally, for the big jump, you have to do a big jump within so many frames of landing from a subsequent jump. And if you mess it up, you will probably just do a regular vertical jump instead of doing a large jump. Also, large jumps only move forward or backward. So there's just a lot going on with the controls that's antagonistic to the player. Then you move on to the harder skill levels. In skill level 2, there are moving enemies and more complicated terrain. And together, it's actually a pretty big difficulty bump up from 1. But also on paper, you can finish a skill level 2 speedrun like within 10 seconds of a good skill level 1 speedrun. So it's more difficult, but it's not that much more difficult. And more specifically, it's not that much slower. Skill level 3 and 4, though, are a massive jump in difficulty. The terrain gets much more complicated to the point to where the controls, the difficulty of the controls really comes to the fore. Also, the enemies get faster and they start pursuing you with slightly more sophisticated logic. In skill levels 1 and 2, they have a couple of different paths they'll take across the screen, and that's it. And once they hit the left side of the screen, they despawn and they're gone until you move to a different screen. In 3 and 4, yeah, it's a lot. Also, in skill level 4, if you die for whatever reason, you don't just move back to the beginning of the screen you're on. It moves you back to the beginning of the region you're on. Also, the regions are 5 screens long now instead of the 2 screens long that they are in skill level 1. So another example of ColecoVision difficulty being, hey, here's these 5 things that we can do to control the difficulty, and every time you bump the skill level, we're going to bump all of them at once. and they interact in ways that make the difficulty, I would say, nonlinear. Oh, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the problem with Smurfs on ColecoVision that has nothing to do with the actual game. Timing, um, specifically emulator timing. So when I approached this game, I was playing in BizHawk using the ColecoHawk core, which, hey, it's in BizHawk. BizHawk is made by the Taz Video folks. Generally speaking, I consider it, if not the gold standard, at least like a good point of reference for emulator accuracy versus original hardware. Or at the very least, like, if it's inaccurate, it will probably get better over time, and it's probably at least consistent in its timing. So I started there. I started on skill level 1, and I noticed I plateaued for my times pretty quickly, and I couldn't explain the discrepancy between my time and the better times on the board. And I even did, so at some point I'm like, well, here, I'm going to go frame by frame, side by side on these runs. And I noticed the first and second place runs were walking faster than I was. And it's like, oh no, what's going on here? And digging more, it's like, oh, they're not using BizHawk. It's fine. They're using an emulator called CallM, a Coleco emulator. And so I'm like, okay, well, here, I'll get the latest, how do I get that? I go to the website from the person that makes it. Last version is a couple of years old, and they have Windows and Linux versions. So I say, okay, I'll get the Linux version of 3.6, I think was the latest version there. I try it. It runs a little bit faster, but sometimes a little bit slower. Sort of weird. But I know that's not the version that the top run used. They used CallM 3.4. So I try 3.6 some more. I try flipping between PAL and NTSC. Fun fact, on CallM, if you switch to PAL, everything runs faster, which doesn't seem right for switching between PAL and NTSC for multi-region games, but so at some point I go to a totally not sketchy at all looking website that has older versions of CallM and managed to get 3.4 for Windows. So I run that in Wine, and number one, the default configuration, at least in that zip file that I got, was PAL timing and only show 75% of frames, which makes the game run, one, like at this weird herky-jerky frame rate, and two, runs slower than I think even BizHawk. It was very weird, especially compared to other versions of CallM. So I changed it to NTSC 100 and show 100% of frames, and at that point I had something that matched the top runs. So, and that's what I used for all of my final runs, including the world record run now. So, on that note, if anyone has an original ColecoVision and a copy of Smurfs Rescue at Gargamel's Castle or a flash cart and is willing to help me do some experiments, please contact me. I'd appreciate that. I'd love to know. I'd just love to have any insight into what actual timing is on original hardware, because at this point, I've got 3 emulators with like 7 different possible timings for holding right on the Smurfs game and just walking. It's yeah. So next game, it was what I was just playing. Drelbs. I'm playing the C64 version. Apparently it was also released for one of the Atari home computers. But Flannel Cat recommended this to me, saying it was, quote, winter-coated. It took a while for it to click, but now that it's clicked, it's pretty good. Still frustrating, but I'm hoping to get a world record improvement on it. I did get a nice, not really clean run, but it was a pretty fast run. But as I continue to play it in each stream at this point, I regularly get on -30 to -2 minute paces. So I'd like to keep on doing that till I get a much cleaner, faster run, but we'll see where that goes. And that's Drobes, and that covers all the games that I ran in April. So at this point, I say thanks for watching, everybody, in April. Hope you continue to watch in May. Also, this is sort of the only thing I do for money, so if you happen to have any money thrown my way in form of bits or subs, or I'll eventually get my coffee working again, I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, I love it when people hang out and chat. That's great. Hope you enjoy what you're seeing. And that's the April roundup.